sisters, brothers, let's love one another.
Let's go to the videotape.
Remember me? In the waning days of analog technology, you recorded some of your favorite shows using me, and I faithfully reproduced them in the best possible quality, according to what mode you wanted me to record in. You forgot about me, didn't you? Some of you moved on to laser discs, and eventually everyone made the move to DVDs or TiVo, etc. Digital is so overrated, and these days you don't even have any physical artifacts to put on your shelves or in your cabinets for your taped memory shows or movies. You stream and you record and you still play things on your TVs, but also on your little handheld devices. Some devices small enough to put in your back pocket or easily hold in the palm of your hand. I'll be here in your dark, cold cabinets, collecting dust on your shelves until you feel that nostalgia again for days gone by.
Actually, let's cut away from the videotape. Hello, I want to talk now a little bit about AC/DC. I know we're talking a little bit about music on this episode, but it's not what you think. I was trying to use my brand new Sonicake Vol-Wah pedal. It's a pedal that you can alternate volume and wah with, and it wasn't working. And, you know, I was trying different things to show you here. You know, all these things, you know, this end of things fit perfectly into the product, and I just couldn't get the darn thing to work. Let's see here. See, fits perfectly. Well, guess what? This is AC power supply, different voltage. I had to go to the store and make sure I had a 9-volt DC power supply, not the AC I was trying to plug into it. So once I use the right power supply, this 9-volt DC power supply, light goes on and it works. So to those who have ever struggled with, you know, things fit but they don't work, check to make sure you have the right power supply, because if you're a technical doofus like myself, you'll be struggling with this for a while. So I just want to save, hopefully, somebody the time of, you know, not having to do that.
Here's my working wall.
So on a whim, Sunday before last, I decided to go to the Rolling Stones concert when it came to town at US Bank Stadium in Minneapolis, and it was a lot of fun. I'll never go again, and this was kind of, you know, once in a lifetime thing for me, and I'm glad I went. So I want to tell a story with a local flavor here. There's a character named Jimmy, Mr. Jimmy, in the song "You Can't Always Get What You Want" by the Rolling Stones. From their Let It Bleed album, the last song on that album. So I just want to read from an article telling of the story. This was by Steve Tanko, as published online on November 14th, 2013. And I quote, "He was at the drugstore, the Chelsea drugstore, but in reality that wasn't its name. Actually, it was the Bacon drugstore. The narrator was standing in the prescription line with a gentleman named Mr. Jimmy," and I'm using air quotes there. "Two strangers who decided to have a soda. But what kind? Ah, their favorite, cherry Coke. When the pop came back, it was plain Coca-Cola, not cherry. Sound familiar?" Those words form part of the basis of the Rolling Stones song, "You Can't Always Get What You Want." The story is true. Mr. Jimmy's real name was Jimmy Hutmaker, the town ambassador of Excelsior, Minnesota. Hutmaker was born April 18th in 1932 in New Germany, Minnesota, and moved with his family to Excelsior as a teenager. Despite unspecified developmental disabilities, Hutmaker had an outgoing demeanor and an and an engaging personality, and was given the honorary title of roving ambassador for the city of Excelsior. At this point, you may have never known Mr. Jimmy, but there's more to this story. It was in this capacity as the town ambassador that Hutmaker spent his days and nights wandering the streets of the city, chewing on a cigar, mumbling to himself, and greeting locals by name. Someone paid for business cards with this title for Mr. Jimmy, and he carried them for the rest of his life. It is reported that he knew most Excelsior natives and their children by name, and also knew what churches they attended and family history. According to legend, it was in his capacity as town ambassador that Hutmaker attended a concert by the Rolling Stones at the Danceland Ballroom at Excelsior Amusement Park in 1964. Just an aside, Mick Jagger did mention at the concert I was at several nights ago about the first time they were in the Minneapolis area was in 1964, and he mentioned the venue. So that was interesting. Okay, back to the article. The next day, Mick Jagger was having a prescription filled at Bacon's drugstore when he encountered Jimmy again. Jimmy complained to Jagger that he had ordered a cherry Coke, but received a regular Coca-Cola instead, then dismissed his own complaint, saying, "You can't always get what you want." 5 years later, on their 1969 album, Let It Bleed, the Stones released a song titled You Can't Always Get What You Want, and references to a drugstore, a cherry soda, a prescription, and Mr. Jimmy, Hutmaker's nickname around town, all appear in the song. It's also told that Mr. Jimmy just so happened to be ill, as it is said in the song. So it goes on from there, but very interesting local story that I wanted to share. Speaking of music, just some wonderful music that's coming out lately. A release called This Beautiful Mystery by Terry Scott Taylor. Man, just wonderful, wonderful music. I've had the pleasure of hosting along with my friend Dean Zimmerman, actually, Dean and Tammy Zimmerman, in their Basement of Sound, their illustrious Basement of Sound in East Brunswick, New Jersey, have hosted several concerts. I've had the joy and privilege of meeting and helping in some small way with these shows. One of the first shows was Terry Scott Taylor and Friends, which saw Steve Hindalong and Terry's son, actually, as well, come out and perform. And that was back in, say, 2009. And then shortly after that, Mike Rowe came out and gave a show. Just some wonderful, wonderful experiences. And the best, I would say, one of the best songwriters around today, and I would say the best songwriter in terms of in Christendom. And a lot of people may not even know who he is, but you got to check it out, and you got to check out the this podcast called True Tunes. John Joseph Thompson. I mean, he knows his stuff, music-wise, in terms of Christian music and all kinds of stuff. And he curates really great stuff every time he throws together a podcast. And if it's not the latest podcast, it was very recent, and I will link to both of those. There's a 2-part interview, and they go in depth into the album, and it's an interview with Terry Scott Taylor, and that's a treasure to listen to. And they talk through Terry's his story and his how he came into Christian music and music in general, and just his influences, and then the second part goes more into breaks down the album, the new album, which is just wonderful. It's just I'm soaking it in, and I've been listening to it a lot lately. So it's good stuff. I can't wait to get the vinyl when it comes. That's going to be awesome. But listening to it, just the songs on my phone in my car and stuff, it's been great tunes. I can't break it down for you any better than is done with John Joseph Thompson and Terry himself on that episode. So I commend that to you, both parts. And again, I'll link to those. A lot of other great music to speak of as well. Vector, an album on Mezzo Music. If you go to Mezzo Music Limited, I think you find the YouTube on it, or if you go to Mezzo Music Limited, not only YouTube but just on the internet, you'll find it. And I've been tuning in every week, really since the pandemic really got going. It might have been early April that they started with it, but Mike Rowe and Bruce Spencer, just every week they play great tunes. They play some from their catalog, but they'll play others from songs that you'd recognize over the years on the radio and stuff. It's just a lot of fun, and their banter and stuff. It's I've always thought of Mike as a just one of the great musicologists. He could talk a lot about various, and I could listen to that all day. But the music itself is great as well. Kind of off the cuff. They practice maybe a little bit, but it's just a lot of fun. Just every week for about an hour, to hear that. So I'll link to the they call it Coronasphere. Row is in there as well. In the name Coronasphere, sort of a play on words, right up my alley with puns. Anyway, if you like music and you want to expose yourself to something good and new, if you aren't already familiar with the things I mentioned, I definitely would recommend that. Maybe it's not for everybody, but I would say it's probably for a lot of people. At least I'd like to think so. Definitely for me, and I'd recommend it. So hopefully that means something. All right, so that's enough about that. And I hope everybody continues to do well. Take care.
Oh, hello. So I want to dedicate this show to a couple of people. One, Mark Zumgrotzky. He was somebody that I had the pleasure of working with for many years at AT&T. He knew his stuff in fraud management, and he was well respected throughout the telecom industry. I had the chance to jam with him finally. We had talked about it for years because he's also a great guitar player in his own right. And so that was fun. That happened in 2019 in June here in, Minneapolis, where we met at the CFCA, Communications Fraud Control Association conference. And that was a lot of fun. But Mark was a good guy, good to work with, and I considered him a friend as well. And I would consider him somewhat of a musicologist when it comes to classic rock. His favorite band of all time was Led Zeppelin. His favorite guitar player, Jimmy Page. Unfortunately, I didn't get to make it back to New Jersey when they had the wake. Which was about a month ago, I believe. And I understand, they had his guitar, his double neck guitar, a la Jimmy Page's guitar, that you think of as he's playing Stairway to Heaven.
and they had that music playing and stuff there. So, yeah, it would have been pretty cool to be there. But alas, I wasn't able to be there, but I was there in spirit. And so this show is dedicated to Mark. I'd also like to dedicate it to Bob Laymer. He was a classmate of mine, class of 1989, Wayzata High School. He passed away at the age of 49 due to colon cancer. And literally his one of his dying wishes was that people would get a colonoscopy, probably even earlier than 50, because he was 49 and it was too late for him. But a great guy, a great attitude, and right up to the end. And again, he had a conference call shortly before he passed, and one of his dying wishes there was that people would get that colonoscopy, get it checked out. And I'm finally doing it to honor his wish, and for myself, for my own benefit. It's sort of a rite of passage, I guess, that, when you turn 50, you do this, but there's so many things out there that can get us, one way or another in the end. No pun intended. So anyway, just encourage anybody that's turned 50, anyone from my graduating class that didn't hear Bob already talk about it, to get it done. I'm finally doing it, a little bit, albeit late, but I'm glad I'm getting that out of the way. And that's happening tomorrow, and I'm starting the process this afternoon of cleansing my colon. Woohoo! So anyway, enough about that. Anyway, Bob Laymer, just want to give a shout out to him and to his family and those that knew him and that he left behind. And so, shout out to Bob, shout out to Mark. And what do we want to talk about here on this episode? I want to talk a little bit about music. I put together a little thing about the Rolling Stones, a little story that will be of interest, hopefully, to some of you. I want to talk about that best blues cover band in the world, Rolling Stones. Yeah. That's a little nod to Paul McCartney, who basically said that the Rolling Stones were basically, I don't know what the exact quote was, but a glorified blues cover band. And I would argue that they are that and more. They kind of expanded the genre beyond that. I love the Beatles, and by the way, Get Back, I really recommend it. I saw the first part of 3 episodes on Disney+. Just definitely something to check out, just to be a fly on the wall, to see how some of those songs written during that era developed. You can see Get Back getting formed right before your eyes if you're interested in that sort of thing. I am, and I found it fascinating. Songs like Let It Be, you watch the process and you see the interaction between, like, say, John and Paul, and you see that it's not, the tension is there among certain band members at certain times, but you can kind of see that it's not what it was hyped up to be. It's, Yoko's there, Linda, later Linda McCartney, Linda Eastman at that time was there, and they're all having a good time and enjoying the process for the most part. So George Harrison walks out at the end of part 1 and says he's quitting the band, and anyway, that's pretty fascinating, and I think it, a lot of the tension that he felt was coming to a head because he was writing songs, and becoming a more prominent player in the Beatles, and it's just fascinating to watch that happen. And you can kind of see at times, Paul McCartney especially was very aware that the camera was on, And so, that creates a different dynamic, but it's all very fascinating. And by the way, speaking of the Beatles, I found something that was, talking about my birthday. I was born in November 1970, giving away my age a little bit, but recorded at that time, I think at the end of that month. Actually, I think it was recorded possibly on this day or November 30th, was George Harrison's All Things Must Pass, I believe. Let me find it. Yes, All Things Must Pass. And I found this box set at Water Street Antiques in Jordan, Minnesota. And it's in great shape. I found some other things from around that era as well. And as a vinyl collector, that was one I'm happy to have in my collection. The Rolling Stones concert I went to on October 24th showed them to be in fine form considering their age. Mick Jagger still, has a voice. He's never had a, dynamic range, but it's unmistakable voice, and it was definitely his. And Keith Richards, he had to sit down a time or two, and I think Mick Jagger got in his case about that. But he's still doing it. And Ronnie Wood as well at, I think, 74. Keith Richards is 77, Mick Jagger at 78. Rest in peace, Charlie Watts, who died at the age of 80 not long ago. But it was a great show. Black Pumas opened up, and they were great. They're a fairly new band, and it was great to see them, and it was a great show. What else? I want to just talk about some books that I've been reading. I think I mentioned this in the last podcast. This is The Liturgy of Politics. Subtitle is Spiritual Formation for the Sake of Our Neighbor. I'm almost finished with it, and it really struck me because, we think about, the things that form us, and politics are something that forms us. But if, as a follower of Christ, what should be forming us, I would argue, is primarily and above all, and it's not, as Tozer has said, it's not God and it's God. God is in everything. He should be the focus of everything, and so all of our interests, our loves, our appetites, things like that should focus around Him and pleasing Him. What are those things that brings the heart of God happiness? Well, we know that He wants us to love Him, and He wants us to love our neighbors, those who He has created in His image. Anyway, I guess it's sort of a roundabout way of saying this book, talks about things like that. One of the things that stood out to me is the chapter 3, the Gospels of Prosperity, Patriotism, Security, and Supremacy. And she goes into those things. And let me just read from James K.A. Smith, and I had recommended a book of his in a previous podcast. And a lot of this is probably informed by James K.A. Smith, among many other things. But Caitlin Shess, the author, does a really good job in this book. I think she's only 27, and man, she's got a lot of wisdom. I really appreciate her. She's on a podcast called Holy Post that I really recommend. Anyway, the quote from James K.A. Smith at the beginning of this chapter says, merely is in quotes, political and social allegiances trump religious allegiances all the time, whether in presidential primaries, under the grotesque shadow of the lynching tree, or in horrifying cases like the Rwandan genocide. That should give many of us pause living in this country that we live in, that we love very much. We love our country if we're Americans. But our allegiance, if we are followers of Christ, is not to our country. Our ultimate allegiance is to Christ. And these gospels that she's talking about here, prosperity gospel, the patriotism gospel, security gospel, and supremacy gospel, they are so embedded in our culture that to disentangle it, we really have to think critically. And I think if we do any amount of critical thinking on it, you'll come to the same conclusion. Depending on the church you go to, you may be exposed to the prosperity gospel all the time, that God wants us to be materially prosperous, and it, to the extent that we're not, God's not blessing us. Well, that's a false gospel. And we need to call it out for what it is. It's a false gospel. That's not God's purpose for our lives, to make us successful financially. I mean, that may be a byproduct and a good thing, but it's not the end goal. There's the gospel of patriotism, that love of country is the be-all, end-all. And for those who are outside of Christ, outside of Christianity, I understand that. Yeah, if that's what you got, that's what you got. But if you're a follower of Christ, I understand this for God and country thing, but that's not a gospel thing. That's not a gospel of Jesus Christ thing. It's not a kingdom thing. We love our country, but country is under God, and we are, if we are with God, serving God, then our ultimate loyalty is to God and to what He would want. And in some cases, there's a conflict between, what maybe our patriotic, the patriotic thing to do for love of country. There might be a conflict there at times between that and what the kingdom of God says, and our ultimate allegiance is to God. Security. I mean, you hear this all the time, radio, Christian radio, for example. We're safe for the whole family, and, security, don't go there. That's not a safe neighborhood. And we build walls with people that God would want us to reach out to, that God would want us to have an affinity towards, the vulnerable, those who are the outcasts, the dregs of our society. We know it's what God would want us to do. So do we value our security more than we value, our relationship with God and what He has to say about who our neighbor is, who we are to love? Supremacy. This is one that's a lot of times so embedded that it's hard for us to disentangle it. And when I'm talking about supremacy, I'm talking about primarily white supremacy. Let's face it. I'm gonna admit it, that I'm surrounded by primarily white folks, and that's I believe we need to open ourselves up to others, that may or may not be like us, and we need to really reach out. And that's for all of us. But I'm just looking through here to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Yeah, and I don't want to misstate anything here. I'm talking about white supremacy, but yet I'm kind of on the other side. I'm saying that we need to reach out to people, and that those two aren't necessarily the same things. There's one gospel, and I'm quoting here from Caitlin in chapter 3. There's one gospel that is simultaneously pervasive in the white American church and most firmly denied by it, the gospel of white supremacy. And again, it's hard for us to disentangle this because, we generally are not in multicultural churches. Okay, it's just a fact. And this is a lot of testifies to what we can hopefully get into in other podcasts, the breakdown in neighborhoods. When I moved to Minnesota, one of the first things I noticed moving from New Jersey is how segregated things are here. And a lot of that has to do with the housing setup that was happening many years ago. Blacks were separated from the whites, and a lot of that was by design. It was in the system, so you could say it was systemic. And that's a fact. So, and a lot of the attitudes that we carry today, we may not even realize it, but that's sort of embedded very, very much so in our culture, in our society. And we don't reckon with that because we don't have to. We live in our suburban bubbles in many cases, and I think we need to break out of that. We need to reach out to our Christian brothers and sisters who may be marginalized in some way. And look at the Black church. I was privileged to be in a congregation that was multi-ethnic, multicultural. A lot of blacks and a lot of whites, I wasn't there. I was there for several years, and it was wonderful. While I was there, and just the friendships that I hope I still have, and I'm just a very introverted person and haven't reached out. But I would want my Black brothers and sisters to know how much I appreciate them, how much I love them, how much I care about what's happening in our country. It's one thing that we can do is we can show that we care, and we can educate ourselves on what has happened to this point. And, that's something that we can do, and we can reach out. So one of my hopes for this podcast is that I can shine a light on things like that. And hopefully one day talk to my friend Lenny about him coming on the podcast. I'm pretty technically illiterate, but hopefully I can set up a Zoom call, or we can set something up and have some friends, of mine from the past, and ones that I'd like to get back in touch with and stay in touch with. Talk about their experiences. We have a lot of podcasts where people, who have written books and stuff like that come on podcasts. Well, I'd kind of like this to be the podcast for the common man, if that's not too grandiose a thing, where people who are living and working could talk about their experiences. And I want to shine a light on, those who have ever felt marginalized. And that includes people who, for one reason or another, maybe it's family relationships and, things just aren't happening there and they feel left out. Maybe they've taken some wrong turns in their lives, and, and so they feel like an outcast. Those are the kind of people that I think God very much wants us to reach out to. Anyway, I'm just kind of just going off the cuff here. So that book, Liturgy of Politics, I would highly recommend it. It'll open your eyes. Another one, Good Faith, and the subtitle is Being a Christian When Society Thinks You're Irrelevant and Extreme. It's by David Kinnaman and Gabe Lyons. David Kinnaman, I know, works as the president of Barna, a company that's sort of the... now I'm losing my train of thought, but it's basically a research company, and gathered a lot of research. And based on that research, this book came out. They wrote another book called Unchristian several years ago that uncovered, like back then, and might have been 2009, or maybe even earlier, maybe it was 2006, I don't know, uncovered a lot of trends, disturbing trends, that people, when they think of Christianity in the context of American culture, they think of things like homophobic, judgmental. I don't have it in front of me, but I've got the book somewhere around. But that's what people think of, generally when they think of the church. And it's not a positive look. It's not that the Christian community needs to always be looked at positively. That's not what it's about, and that's not what I'm saying. But when somebody that's outside of the church, or maybe even inside of the church, and is trying to hang on, to their faith. And there's a lot of people that are losing their faith because it's really not a faith at all that they can cling to, because it's not based on the gospel. It's based on a very, very Americanized version of, and a distortion of the gospel. And so anyway, being a Christian when society thinks you're irrelevant and extreme, that's... they're the results of their look this time. And this book was written in 2016, but it's still applicable today, especially in the last, I'd say 5 years. That's when people associate evangelical Christians with conservative Trump supporters, for example. And I'm not. My goal in this podcast is not to dwell too heavily on politics specifically in terms of who to vote for and who not to, because on both sides you'll have people weighing in and disparaging the candidate or the president, and disparaging even the people that voted for those. And that's ridiculous. If you're a Christ follower, you should not be disparaging anyone. And as I said before, our battle is not against flesh and blood. And our enemy is not other people. And there's this kind of rhetoric where we're constantly having flame wars, culture wars. It's not helpful to the body of Christ, and it's certainly not helpful to those who are on the outside looking in and saying, what's this Christianity thing about? And if they're seeing this sort of thing, and it in their minds is equated with a political kingdom, it's a false gospel. And let's call it for what it is. It is Antichrist. Yep, that's right. It's Antichrist. And I want to encourage everyone to really think critically about your engagement, my engagement with the world. Are we following after God and His kingdom? And how might He be asking us to engage with the least of these, those who we might not have interaction with in our everyday lives? There's lots of people out there that need to know that we care. What else? I read N.T. Wright, God in the Pandemic. It's a kind of a quick read. Usually his books aren't quick reads because they're very packed with good information, and he's a brilliant mind. It's a Christian reflection on the coronavirus and its aftermath. I read it a little while ago, but I think my biggest takeaway was it's not one of the biggest things we shouldn't be doing as followers of Christ. First of all, we should be a positive example of what it looks like. And I see it, people tout things like faith over fear, and sometimes it's hard to know exactly what is meant. Some cases it's meant, I don't need a vaccine. I'm not fearful. I don't need a vaccine. Well, maybe that's just kind of lacking sense in some cases, and I hope I'm not putting too fine a point on it, and I don't want to offend people, but and maybe in some cases it's something else, but we can do the sensible thing, and that doesn't mean we have fear. It just means we are taking the necessary precautions. And I would recommend, by the way, on that topic, I mentioned Holy Post podcast. Look up the one with, I forget, I don't have his name handy. It's the NIH director. I think he was until very recently, and he retired from that. But he was basically Dr. Fauci's boss. He was on the Holy Post and interviewed by Phil Vischer. I think it was the week before last. He's a Christian, and listen to what he has to say about the vaccine, and we have a very much of an anti-science bias in the I'll just say the conservative Christian world, which I am a part of. Okay, I didn't, I'll lay it out there, put it out there that's where I come from. But there are many things that we need to examine critically, and really think about. We need, again, our allegiance is to Christ. It's not to conservative politics. It's not to safety and security, etc. So I guess maybe enough about that. Another book I finished reading recently, Cash, Johnny Cash, can't read backwards, The Redemption of an American Icon by Greg Laurie with Marshall Terrell. I think this is one of the best books on Johnny Cash I've read. I think I've read 3. The other one that I really recommend is by Stephen Turner. That was a really good one. But this is written from the perspective of his struggle, his Christian faith, and his struggles, throughout his life with, drugs and alcohol. And this really, more than any other book I've read about Johnny Cash, really told that story, and that it was a struggle really throughout his life. It wasn't just like he got victory over it, and then he was fine. He struggled throughout his life with that, starting with the amphetamines in the 50s when he was traveling from show to show and trying to, keep awake and keep his energy up. And he, had his ups and downs throughout his spiritual life, like all of us, really, that are in that struggle between spirit and flesh. So I recommend that book to anyone. And the thing I get out of it is just the authenticity of the man and why he's so respected by, those in and out of the faith community. Because he really struggled, and he was honest about his struggles. Ultimately, he was honest about his struggles. And, something like that is very refreshing, and we need more of those kinds of voices today. So, yeah. What else do I want to say? Maybe that's enough for now. I want to thank you for your time, and have a wonderful month, I guess, because I'm trying to do these once a month. I might miss a month or two because, again, this is a labor of love, and I hope if even one person gets something out of this, and if I can just maybe help somebody in some way, some small way, I really want this to be a place where people would be encouraged and really maybe rethink their how their faith looks in this moment, in our culture. And when I say our culture, I mean, I guess American culture, but really anybody throughout the world, that has similar struggles. I'm sure that the United States is not the only place that deals with this sort of polarization. One thing that I'll probably speak to in another episode too is about our the dualistic nature of our culture, and I think it's Aristotelian or Socrates. Socrates, if you remember Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. The idea of either or thinking, that you have one side, you have another side. You've got Republican, you got Democrat, you got liberal, you got conservative, you know, you've got woke, you've got not woke. All right, I'll bleep myself there. I won't say it, but that's just a bunch of crap. If you're a follower of Christ, that kind of dualistic thinking shouldn't be there. Our allegiance is to Christ, and many times the quote unquote narrow way, as the Bible talks about, is not going to be on the left or the right. It's going to be a third way, and we need to call out those things that are very much opposed to Christ and godly thinking. Even if, you know, the people in the church are saying these sorts of things, you need to question, you know, where is it coming from? Is it aligning with the Bible? Is it aligning with what God has to say? And a lot of what I'm hearing in the culture today, even from the church, does not align. I'm thankful I go to a church where, you know, these things can be talked about and challenged. And one of the things that I've heard is, you've heard of the, what do you call it? That complex, the military-industrial complex. Well, there's something out there that's been named called the Evangelical Industrial Complex. And the idea is basically that, you know, a lot of what is funded in our church today are things that will keep that complex going. You know, the things that people want to hear, you know, that are financially viable. Well, it's not financially viable to say probably 95% of what I'm saying here. But this is what it's going to take. We have to have this this third way in mind, which is the way of Christ. You know, I'm not saying I'm perfect at it. I'm trying to learn, what does that way look like? I want to know and practice that with the help of the Holy Spirit. And that's something we all need to do as followers of Christ, living in the culture we live in today. And so anyway, I hope something in here, I know I do a lot of rambling, and that's what happens when I don't prepare specifically. I may have a skeletal idea of what I want to talk about, but maybe next time I'll do a little more prep work, so I'm not just riffing off the cuff all the time. So I want to thank everyone for their time and attention, and God bless you all. Talk to you next time.